When Amelia Langford stepped into the private hangar, the jet was supposed to be 10 minutes from takeoff and one flight away from saving her company. Instead, Mason Carter, a contract technician and single father with overdue bills in his pocket, stood beneath the forward cabin door, staring at a thin crack in the fuselage. The operations director called it cosmetic. The lawyer placed a certification contract on the table. The pilot waited in silence. Amelia looked at the crack, then at the investor call flashing on her phone, and made the choice everyone was too afraid to say aloud. Tape it and fly. The words froze the hangar. Mason saw the silver repair tape, the unsigned contract, and the faces of people who would be strapped inside that aircraft at 30,000 feet. Signing would save his job. Refusing could destroy the life he had rebuilt for his child. But Mason picked up the contract, tore it in half in front of the CEO, and dialed the FAA before security could drag him out. By nightfall, one phone call would threaten an aviation empire built on lies. And the question was simple: what else had Langford Aviation hidden below? The private hangar at the edge of Dallas Executive Airport glowed under white lights, sealed from the public runway by steel doors and tinted glass. On the concrete floor, a silver and white Langford Aviation jet waited with its nose pointed toward the closed doors, fueled, stocked, and scheduled to leave for New York in less than an hour. For Amelia Langford, that flight was not a luxury. It was the last narrow bridge between her company and collapse. A merger meeting in Manhattan had already been delayed twice, and the investors waiting there had made one thing clear: if Amelia did not arrive in person that afternoon, the deal would die. Without the deal, half her fleet could be grounded by winter, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs, and her father's company could become another ruined name on a creditor's list. She stood near the nose of the jet in a tailored Navy suit, one hand gripping her phone as an investor's assistant repeated that the window was closing. Amelia was young for a CEO, but no one who worked for her mistook youth for softness. She had learned to speak briefly, decide quickly, and never let panic show. Across the hangar, Logan Reed, the director of operations, moved with a clipboard tucked under his arm, telling mechanics to finish checks, and everyone else that delay was not an option. Mason Carter entered through the side door carrying a scarred black tool case. He was not part of Langford's permanent crew. He was a contract technician called in at the last minute because 2 regular mechanics were out and Logan wanted extra signatures on the pre-flight file. Mason signed the visitor sheet, nodded to the young apprentice by the tool bench, and went straight to work. He had the quiet look of a man who knew words could be used against him. His jacket was clean but worn at the cuffs, and his phone kept buzzing in his pocket with reminders he did not need to read. Rent due Friday, utility payment past due. School lunch account low. Years earlier, Mason had held a steady job at a major carrier respected by crews who trusted his eye until he reported a shortcut management wanted hidden. The report was accurate. The punishment was quiet. His hours disappeared, his references cooled, and the industry remembered him as difficult long after it forgot the defect. Since then, he had rebuilt his life one contract at a time, careful to keep his head down but never careful enough to sign a lie. He walked along the jet's fuselage, slowly trailing his gloved fingertips over the metal the way another man might read a page. Panels, seams, rivets, reflections. All of it spoke if he paid attention. The hangar pulsed with urgency, but Mason moved at the speed of certainty. Near the forward cabin door, his hand stopped. At first, the mark looked harmless, a thin line catching the light beside the seam, faint enough that a rushed technician could call it a scratch. Mason crouched lower. The line did not behave like a scratch. It ran along a stress area too close to the pressurized doorframe, and the paint around it looked newer than the surrounding surface, as if someone had tried to make old damage appear minor. He set down his case, took out a small inspection light, and angled it across the skin. The line sharpened. His jaw tightened. A hairline crack. Not long, not dramatic, not the kind of damage that made people step back. But Mason knew aircraft did not need dramatic wounds to become dangerous. Sometimes they only needed one weak place and one person in a hurry. He called over Logan, who arrived looking at his watch before he looked at the plane. "What is it?" Logan asked. Mason pointed to the crack and said the aircraft needed a deeper inspection before anyone signed it off. Logan leaned in for barely 3 seconds, then straightened with a dismissive breath. "Surface blemish. Cosmetic. Internal team already cleared this area." Mason did not move. Mason. He asked for the prior repair records and a non-destructive scan. Logan's expression cooled. "We do not have time for a science project." Mason looked back at the crack. "Then we do not have time to fly." The apprentice at the tool bench, Ryan Miller, heard the sentence and stopped pretending to sort sockets. Captain David Brooks glanced over from his checklist. The hangar did not go silent, not yet, but its noise changed. Tools became softer. People listened without turning their heads. Amelia noticed the shift before she heard the words. She ended her call and crossed the floor with Logan moving quickly to intercept her. "Why are we stopped?" she asked. Logan answered first, smooth and immediate. "A contractor is overreading a cosmetic mark. We are handling it." Mason stood. "It is near a pressurized structure. I need time and proper equipment to confirm the depth." Amelia looked at him as if measuring the cost of every syllable. "Your name?" "Mason Carter." "Mr. Carter, this aircraft is due in New York today. I have a room full of people waiting on that flight." "Then they should be glad someone is checking whether it can make the trip safely." The answer landed harder than Mason intended, but he did not take it back. Amelia's eyes narrowed. She was not used to being challenged in her own hangar, especially not by a man whose contract was still clipped inside Logan's folder. Logan stepped closer and lowered his voice, though not enough to hide it. He said the regular team had seen the mark days earlier, the repair had been documented, and Mason was turning a routine issue into leverage. Mason asked to see the documentation. Logan hesitated just a fraction too long before handing over the tablet. Mason noticed. He scrolled through the maintenance entries and felt the old, familiar coldness settle in his stomach. The descriptions were vague. Inspection times were stacked too close together to be realistic. The repair note referred to surface polishing but included no photographs. One signature belonged to a technician Mason knew by reputation, a man who had left the field more than a year earlier after raising questions no one wanted answered. Mason looked up. "This log does not support a safe release." Logan's tone hardened. "That is not your determination to make alone. It is my signature you want." Amelia took the tablet from Mason and glanced at the screen, but the entries meant less to her than the clock on the wall. Her phone buzzed again. The investors, the meeting, the board, her father's portrait in the corporate lobby. She told herself she was weighing risks, not ignoring them. She told herself Logan knew the fleet better than anyone. "How long for your inspection?" she asked. "Long enough to know whether that crack is structural." "That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have." Logan laughed without humor and pulled Mason aside near the wing, away from Amelia, but still in view of the crew. He spoke in the soft voice of a man offering kindness before punishment. There was a bonus, he said, for technicians who helped during high-pressure departures. A simple sign-off, a temporary tape seal noted as cosmetic protection, and everyone could move on. Mason stared at him. "You are asking me to certify something I have not verified." Logan's smile disappeared. "I am reminding you that Langford Aviation uses contractors across 6 hangars. People who create unnecessary disruption do not get called back." Mason thought of the rent notice folded on his kitchen counter. He thought of his son asking if they could still go to the school science fair on Saturday. He thought of what happened the last time he chose the report over the paycheck. For 1 second, fear opened its mouth inside him. Then he looked past Logan at the jet at the narrow door where passengers would step in trusting people they would never meet. "I need the scan," Mason said. Logan turned away in disgust. The next 10 minutes tightened around the hangar like wire. Amelia took 2 more calls and grew paler with each one. David Brooks stayed near the cockpit, listening hard. Ryan Miller approached Mason when Logan was occupied and whispered that this was not the first time paperwork had moved faster than repairs. Mason looked at him sharply, but Ryan stepped back the moment Logan turned. The warning was small, but it confirmed what Mason's hands already knew. Something was wrong beyond one crack. An assistant arrived carrying a roll of silver aviation repair tape and a fresh folder. The sight stopped Mason more than any threat had. Tape and paperwork brought together like a solution. Logan took the folder and placed it on a narrow service table beside the plane. "Sign the conditional release," he said. "We tape the area as a surface precaution fly to New York and schedule deeper inspection afterward." Mason did not touch the pen. Touch. That is backwards. Amelia came to the table, anger finally breaking through the discipline in her face. "Mr. Carter, I respect caution. I do not respect obstruction. My company is not going to collapse because a last-minute contractor wants to make himself important." Mason met her eyes. "Your company may collapse for other reasons, but it should not kill people on the way down." The words struck the hangar like a dropped tool. Logan snapped his name in warning. Amelia went very still. For a brief moment, Mason saw exhaustion beneath her authority, fear beneath her anger, but fear did not make the plane safe. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen, the aircraft, and the waiting crew. The choice hardened in her face. She pointed at the crack and spoke in a flat, controlled voice that carried to every corner of the hangar. "Tape it and fly." No one moved. Even Logan looked unsettled, hearing it aloud. David lowered his checklist. Ryan stared at the floor. Mason heard the hum of the lights, the faint ticking of cooling metal, his own heartbeat. Amelia pushed the folder toward him. "Sign it or your relationship with this company ends now. If this delay costs us New York, our attorneys will enforce every penalty in that contract." Mason picked up the folder. For a second, everyone thought he was reaching for the pen. Instead, he opened the contract, looked at the signature line, and tore the pages down the middle. The sound was small, but it cut through the hangar louder than Amelia's order. Mason laid the torn halves on the table. "I do not sign my name to a coffin with wings," Logan shouted for security. Amelia's face flushed with humiliation and fury. 2 guards moved in, each taking one of Mason's arms. Mason did not fight them. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed the safety reporting number he had hoped never to use again. As they dragged him toward the hangar doors, he gave his name, the aircraft registration, the location, and the words that would stop everything: unverified structural damage, pressure to certify attempted departure. Behind him, Amelia ordered someone to take the phone. Ahead, the doors opened. Mason kept speaking until the dispatcher repeated the report back. By the time security pushed him outside the gate, he had lost the contract, the paycheck, and the career he had rebuilt. But inside the hangar, the jet had not moved, and everyone who heard understood the real danger had just left the shadows. Mason Carter stood beyond the security gate with one guard still gripping his sleeve, as if the man could not decide whether Mason was a trespasser or the only adult who had understood what was happening inside the hangar. The dispatcher kept him on the line, asking for the registration number again, the exact location of the crack, the name of the operator, and whether anyone with authority had pressured him to certify the aircraft. Mason answered each question clearly. His voice stayed calm because anger would have given Logan Reed the story he wanted. Inside the hangar, Logan was already building that story. He told Amelia Langford that Mason was a disgruntled contractor trying to punish the company after being denied a bonus. Amelia wanted to believe him. It was easier to believe one desperate technician had overreacted than to accept that her own people had nearly loaded her onto a compromised jet. She ordered Logan to find another qualified signature and keep the crew ready. Captain David Brooks did not move back into the cockpit. He stood beside the steps, watching the silver tape still sitting on the service table, and for the first time in years, he felt less afraid of delay than departure. The airport authority called 10 minutes later. The flight was grounded until federal inspectors reviewed the report. Amelia read the notice twice, her face hardening with every word. Logan said they could still resolve it internally, that the FAA had only issued a precautionary hold, that paperwork could explain everything if no one panicked. But the hangar had changed. Mechanics no longer met his eyes. Ryan Miller kept his hands buried in his pockets. David quietly removed his flight bag from the jet. When Inspector Evelyn Harper arrived, she brought no drama with her, only a black case, a federal badge, and the dry authority of someone who had seen powerful people confuse urgency with permission. She asked that the affected area be sealed, that all maintenance records for the aircraft be produced, and that Mason Carter be brought back inside as the reporting technician. The order landed like a slap. Less than an hour after being dragged out, Mason walked back through the same hangar doors while everyone pretended not to stare. Amelia stood near the nose of the aircraft with her arms crossed. Logan watched him like a man watching a lit match approach spilled fuel. Evelyn did not waste time on blame. She asked Mason to show her exactly what he had seen. He guided her to the forward cabin door and pointed out the crack, the newer paint, the slight unevenness around the seam, and the marks where a tool had pressed too hard against the metal. Evelyn listened without interrupting. Then she opened her case and began testing the area herself. The first readings were enough to erase Logan's confidence. The crack was not superficial. It extended beneath the paint close to a pressurized structure, deep enough that no responsible technician could clear the jet without further inspection. The tape would have changed nothing except the appearance of control. Amelia's face did not soften, but something behind her eyes shifted. Evelyn requested the full repair history. Logan handed over the tablet with a forced patience that failed the moment Mason noticed a missing image file and asked about it. Evelyn looked up. "What image file?" Mason explained that repairs around structural areas normally included photographs before and after the work, but this entry contained only a generic note and no supporting pictures. Evelyn scrolled. Then she asked for the archived server copy. Logan said the archive might take time. Amelia turned toward him. "How much time?" He answered too quickly. "A day, maybe two." Evelyn closed the tablet. "Then this aircraft remains grounded." The sentence seemed to remove the air from the room. Amelia stepped away to call her board, and Logan followed, speaking low, urging her not to let a contractor and a government inspector define the company's future. Mason stayed by the tool cabinets, feeling the weight of every glance. Ryan approached when no one was close enough to hear. He was young, pale, with nerves, and he kept looking over his shoulder. "You are not wrong," Ryan whispered. Mason did not answer. Ryan swallowed. There were other files, other sign-offs. People complained, then stopped getting shifts. One guy got reassigned to cargo runs after refusing a plane last spring. Before Mason could ask more, Logan called Ryan's name. The young technician jumped back like a child caught stealing. That was when Mason understood the crack in the jet was only the visible part of a larger fracture. By evening, news of the grounded Langford jet had reached financial reporters. By morning, the merger meeting in New York had collapsed. The investors released a careful statement about regulatory uncertainty. Langford Aviation's stock dropped before lunch. Amelia spent the next 2 days in conference rooms where board members spoke of confidence exposure and optics, while never once saying the word passengers. Publicly, she promised full cooperation. Privately, she authorized legal action against Mason for breach of contract, reputational harm, and unauthorized disclosure of internal information. She told herself the lawsuit was necessary to protect the company. She did not let herself think about the exact moment she had said, "Tape it and fly." The letter arrived at Mason's apartment on a Thursday evening, folded inside an envelope too expensive for the table it landed on. His son was doing homework in the next room. Mason read the threat twice, then placed it beneath a stack of unpaid bills. He had expected retaliation, but expectation did not make fear lighter. Contracts disappeared immediately. 2 hangars stopped returning calls. A supervisor who once praised his work told him he had become a risk no one could afford. Mason began photographing the contents of his workshop, deciding which tools he could sell without losing the ability to work. Still, he organized every note from the hangar time-stamped photos, the registration number, his inspection observations, screenshots of Logan's messages, and the torn contract halves he had kept without knowing why. Catherine Vale, an independent aviation attorney, agreed to meet him after a former mechanic passed her his name. She read the documents in silence, then looked at Mason over the rims of her glasses. "This is not just a contract dispute," she said. "This looks like retaliation for a protected safety report." Mason wanted relief to arrive, but all he felt was exhaustion. Catherine warned him the company would try to make his character the issue because the metal was not on their side. Evelyn's investigation proved that point. The deeper she looked, or she said, the worse the records became. One inspection had been entered before the aircraft was even back in the hangar. One part number did not match the approved specification. One signature belonged to a technician who had left aviation more than a year earlier. Mason recognized the name and remembered hearing that the man had raised concerns before vanishing from the contractor lists. Evelyn interviewed Ryan Miller, who finally admitted that Logan's team had created a language of pressure so practiced it almost sounded professional. Delays were called failures of alignment. Objections were called attitude problems. Safety concerns were called lack of team focus. No one was told directly to lie. They were simply taught what honesty would cost. Amelia discovered the same pattern from the opposite direction. At night, alone in her office, she reviewed budgets Logan had prepared and noticed how maintenance spending had fallen just as merger discussions began. The savings had been praised at board meetings as operational discipline. Now the numbers looked like warning signs: deferred repairs, shortened inspections. Contractors dropped after writing too many notes. Every document carried her approval somewhere because she had trusted Logan to put the truth in front of her. The realization did not free her from guilt. It sharpened it. Logan had manipulated the system, but she had preferred the system because it delivered the answers she needed. She went back to the hangar footage from the day Mason called the FAA. She watched herself point at the crack. She watched Mason ask for one final chance to inspect it. She watched her own mouth form the order that now followed her through every headline. When she paused the footage, Logan stood slightly behind her shoulder, close enough to guide the moment, and far enough to survive it. The formal technical hearing convened 3 weeks later in a federal conference room with no windows and no place for anyone to hide. Mason sat beside Catherine. Amelia sat across from him with a board representative at her right and Logan at her left. Evelyn placed binders on the table in neat stacks. Logan's attorney opened with confidence, describing Mason as a temporary contractor who exceeded his role, misunderstood an approved repair, and caused extraordinary damage to a company already under pressure. Logan added that Mason had been emotional, confrontational, and financially motivated. Mason did not react. Catherine let the accusations sit until it became uncomfortable. Then she began with the photographs. The crack, the fresh paint, the mismatched rivets, the missing repair images, the impossible inspection times. Evelyn testified that the aircraft should not have flown and that Mason's refusal to certify it was consistent with standard safety judgment. David Brooks confirmed that he had overheard the order and would not have flown had he known the full condition. Ryan Miller testified next, his voice shaking at first, then strengthening as he described repeated pressure to clear unresolved issues. Logan's expression tightened. Amelia stared at the table. Catherine produced Logan's messages to Mason, including the offer of a bonus and the threat that Langford hangars would stop using him. Then Evelyn introduced the archived security footage recovered from the internal server. On the screen, Logan appeared in the hangar after Mason had been removed, directing a staff member to replace photos in a maintenance file before inspectors arrived. The room went silent. Logan's attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but the image had already done what words could not. The board representative turned to Amelia and asked why the aircraft had been ordered to fly. For a moment, she looked like the CEO who could still turn any question into strategy. Then she looked at Mason, and the strategy collapsed. She said she had given the order. She said she had relied on Logan's assurances, but that the words were hers. She said pressure did not excuse using authority to silence a legitimate safety concern. The admission did not save her. By the end of the hearing, Logan's deception was exposed, Mason's report was validated, and Amelia's leadership was damaged almost beyond repair. Outside reporters waited. Inside, Mason understood that truth had not restored what he had lost. His phone still held no new job offers. His rent was still due. Companies would still see him as the man who called regulators. Amelia returned to Langford Aviation to find directors discussing her replacement and investors demanding distance. Logan was suspended pending investigation, but the company looked poisoned from the inside out. Mason had been right. Yet he stood with no victory. He had protected strangers he would never meet, but he had also stepped into the same fire that once cost him everything. Amelia passed him without her entourage stopped and seemed ready to speak. Mason waited. No apology came. Only silence heavy with everything that had been broken. Then, Mason turned away carrying his worn tool bag while behind him the empire that had tried to tape over the truth finally began to split wide open forever.